Okay, so this is the last recording. So what we've talked about are that learning is actually when groups of connections are put together with neurons in long-term memory. So you've seen that happen where neurons are trying to connect with each other. You know that we talked about the fact that the brain is made out of nerve fibers. I didn't tell you, but nerve fibers are very similar to muscle fibers, and nobody in this way. I mean, under a microscope, they're very similar. I don't think the mechanisms of how they're similar is important, and probably nothing I can talk about anyway. The most important thing is you would never in your life, unless you just wanted to snap a tendon or come up with rhabdomyolysis or some horrible something that you did to yourself, you would never start from having never lifted a weight in your life to trying to bench press 250 pounds. First of all, you probably couldn't do it. And secondly, if you could manage to swing some sort of a big weight, you really could damage yourself. So if you'll remember that you cannot cram for a harvest, you cannot make muscles grow so you can compete in an worldwide competition or even lift a bunch of weights overnight. You simply can't do it. Your body wasn't made that way. Plants weren't made that way. Learning isn't made that way. And so we moved from there to go just look at neurons. And I told you that you would be seeing something like this so you could label it. And I just want you to learn what a neuron is because it's the basis of what causes learning. And the billion neurons in a piece of rice, though that's true, but you can also have about 86 billion neurons in your brain. So let's talk about how it relates to learning. This is from the book Uncommon Sense Teaching. So in this slide, if I were to blow this up for you, in this slide, you see this might be when you've first been exposed to a concept or when you really don't even know it. And this is the very first time you've tried to think, now what was that she said? And does that relate to anything else in my life? And your diffuse mode might be doing that too. And hopefully then you will go to this position where you have rehearsed it with retrieval practice. Remember I said we'd talk about retrieval practice. Retrieval practice is when you are from memory trying to test yourself, whether it's you've read something in a book and you close that book and then try to remember what you've read, and then you go back to that page, open it back up and see what did I remember. There are all sorts of different ways of retrieving from your working memory the information that you've just been exposed to. And if you do spaced repetition, which is doing a certain amount of studying over that same material over a course of a number of days, then it gets linked deeper and deeper into your long-term memory until it becomes yours. So you can tell, unless you are colorblind, my son is, that's passed down through the mom. I don't know if you know that or not, but men are colorblind and women pass the genes from fathers down to their sons. But if you are, or if you just can't see these shades like I can, I'm just going to describe that in this middle shade, which is where you're learning, these neurons are connecting, but they're connecting faintly. And as you go over to link it, which is, okay, now I'm beginning to connect it with things I already know. Oh, wow. So the dendrites look, they kind of look like shrimp, don't they, or crawdaddies, but they are darker in color. And that's because you've retrieved or rehearsed pulling them out of memory so many more times. Now, not just one day, but you've thought about testing yourself maybe on a Monday at 8 o'clock. You're going to study FYES. And then on Wednesday at 8 o'clock, just for maybe 30 minutes, you're going to study FYES or math or whatever. You have spaced study periods or spaced repetition of retrieval, trying to remember it over and over and seeing how well you do, and then going back in and filling the gaps on things you've not remembered well. Link it by these green chained links is when then you begin to connect it to something that you have in your memory. So I only have 2 more slides to go over, and then that's going to be the end of this week. Slide number 10 deals with something from your textbook, which is how memory works. So you have short-term memory, which stores things for 15 to 30 seconds. The information is either pruned away. So in real terms, you remember how we saw those 26-second videos of the true neurons trying to connect with each other. Once they've made that connection, and if you don't rehearse them, then they are pruned away. They're killed off because whatever connection that you made but didn't rehearse or work on just is seen as useless. And so it just kind of filters away. Again, I don't know the in-depth background of that mechanism, but that's basically what happens. And pruning, like you would prune a tree, is the correct term. So short-term memory also handles about 5 to 9 chunks of information at a time. And if someone interrupts you while you're trying to remember those things, then you drop some of that information. Sometimes you drop it all because you were interrupted. This happens a lot in test anxiety, where you think you've memorized something. In reality, you've just put it into your working memory. And then when you try to recall it in front of the test and everything is quiet, there's a lot of pressure on you, you can't remember a thing. And that's because it was never in your long-term memory, or at least one of the reasons might be that. It's just because you tried to remember it and cram it in there. And again, that works sometimes, but lots of times it doesn't, and it leads to a lot of panic. Long-term memory is where you can store things for years. There's 3 types. Procedural memory is actually when you have remembered patterns, remember how to do something. This is like you remember how to brush your teeth, ride a bicycle, tie your shoes. You could think of procedural as patterns or procedural as habits. There's also semantic, or what's called declarative memory. And so we'll go by the book's definitions of semantic and episodic, meaning that you remember facts for semantics and remembering events. I'm not so concerned about you remembering the categories of long-term memory. It might be nice to know they're different categories, but the most important thing for me is to understand the process of how memory works. So the last 2 slides, working memory, this is just a way for you to think about the different organs or parts of the brain that work. So short-term memory is often in the prefrontal cortex, and there are 4 parts of the brain that are really involved in memory. And I'm going to type those out for you. One of them will be the prefrontal cortex, or the prefrontal lobe, and then the other is long-term memory, which is the neocortex. And that's where your napkin comes in, or that thing I ask you to design. It's because when I peel off this neocortex, I've represented, or I found a picture that represented it by these neon kind of lights. I guess neocortex and neon go together. So if I were to peel this off this brain and iron it, it might come out, or normally it comes out to be about the size of a napkin, like 24 by 24. So one of the other things that I want you to load a photo up of will be how your definition of learning, if I go all the way back to slide number 1, which I'll do. Remember, this is an important definition. Learning is groups of connections are made between neurons and long-term memory. So your napkin is to represent the neocortex, where the long-term memories are held. And then on that napkin, and I don't care how you do this, I just want to see what you perceive as the concept of groups of neurons or groups of connections. So I would assume, like, if you're really familiar with, I don't know, let's say if you're really familiar with construction work and you're going into cybersecurity, then one of your clumps, one of your groups would be construction. And then you would begin to, let's say you're studying cybersecurity this year, then you would begin to link to the things that are similar between cybersecurity and the construction business. That might be building a frame or building something that protects what's inside the building. So, I mean, there are all sorts of ways you could illustrate the things that you already know. I can give you some images of this, but I'll do that afterwards. This is a no-fault assignment. Like, there's no way for you to get any points off of this unless you simply don't participate. The main thing is that you are able to illustrate on a napkin which is representing, remember, your neocortex, because if I were to strip that neocortex off your brain and iron it or flatten it out, it would be about a 24 by 24. And so what I want to do is to see how you on that napkin define this definition, that it takes place in long-term memory. Again, why am I using a napkin for long-term memory? Because the majority of neuroscientists say that long-term memories are held in the neocortex. So, I should just say as a caveat that there are some who also think that it's held in the hippocampus and can be in your little lima bean seahorse shaped hippocampi for as long as 4 years, which frankly sounds long term to me. And so, but the majority of people that are study neuroscience say, no, neocortex is definitely where long-term memory is. And then there's some debate between the hippocampus and holding long-term memories too. Again, before we close, why are we doing this? Why are we even studying this? First, this is all in chapter 7. And when we come back next week, what we're going to talk about is how you get your information. What are the retrieval practices we can use? What are the study techniques we can use to really learn something? And again, learning, let me get that out of the way. Learning is when there are connections made between what you already know and what you're trying to learn in long-term memory. All right, that's it. I'm not talking anymore except to tell you I hope you have a great Memorial Day, and I look forward to talking you through the rest of Chapter 7 and introducing Chapter 5 next week. It's Miss Whitley, Patricia Kirby Whitley, signing off. Thanks so much for listening. Bye-bye.